Hi there, I'm David Hunt, owner of GameMasters Guild, and today I'd like to welcome you back to another Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition showcase. And today I'm going to take a look at the one and only Monster Manual. Now, as I said in my last video, and the one before with the Player's Handbook, and then my last video being the Player's Handbook and the Essentials Kit, or the Starter Kit, with those two books, you almost really don't need the Monster Manual. So, why do you need the Monster Manual? Well, let me tell you. The Monster Manual has 153 different monsters, complete with illustrations, backgrounds, which give you some history, and maybe even a little tactics, just a little bit of, maybe even touch upon just a little bit of lore that actually might help you expand upon the monster and his tactics and how the players encounter them. But now, 153 monsters, that's not all, because that's just without the variations, because when it comes to dinosaurs, I counted that as one listing, which really there's like 5 or 6 of them. Dragons, each one has like a wormling, a young, an adult, and I think an ancient or something like that. There's like 3 or 4 different actual dragon blocks for each one. Some of them, like the Yeti, also have an additional one called the Abominable Yeti. You look at the Yugloths, there are many different versions. So already we're starting to creep up to 200. And then, also, if you count the extra monsters in the back of the book, which aren't even included initially in the table of contents, there are 95 different monsters after all the main ones. And these are some of the more mundane creatures like lions and tigers, cats, poisonous snakes. You've got your giant scorpions. You've got your giant spiders. You've got your mammoths. You've even got your swarm creatures like rats and snakes and insects. So there's another 95 creatures. And then in the very back of the book, you've got 21 different pre-generated NPCs. Some of them are as simple as low-level guards, low-level guards, acolytes, some cult guys, scouts who are, again, real low-level, like, first to third kind of stuff. And but some of them are like the Archmage, where he's considered the equivalent of like an 18th level spellcaster. I think there's a mage in here that's like a equivalent of a 9th level. And some of these guys are pretty BA. And there are some fighters and some other guys in here, it's like gladiators, that are super tough. They got like the thick and like over 120, 150 hit points, and your players would be pretty hard pressed to take these guys on at low level. So that's another 21. And so if we add all these numbers together, we're going to get about 269 big creatures, like mainstream creatures, lesser creatures, and viable NPCs ready to play out of this book. So about 269, and honestly, with some of the variations and stuff that are in there, you're probably pushing closer to about 300. So this book is immense. And that's not all that the Monster Manual has. Because in the beginning, as you start flipping through, before you even get to the monsters, it talks about, briefly, just enough to give you some inspiration, give you some ideas as a DM as to where to seed these monsters. It talks about dungeons, the Underdark, the wilderness areas, towns and cities, underwater, even some of the planes or other planes of existence. And so they touch upon that briefly. And again, it's not a lot, but it's definitely enough for if you're just starting out or you need a little bit of a refresher, they've got that in there for you. Super easy. And you don't get that in the Player's Handbook or even in the Starter Kit or the Essentials Kit. It might have a little blurb for some of the monsters in there, but nothing like this. And then it'll talk about the different types of creatures. It goes into a little bit of elaboration about like dragons and oozes and undead and aberrations and what that means, which is kind of nice because it's nice that it clarifies that and why those tags are there. It talks about various things like their size, the tags like humanoid, orc. So, if something affects humanoids, it'll affect an orc as well. And a lot of times wording is very important. So if a spell says affects so many humanoids in a certain area, well, an orc is considered a humanoid, so it would definitely affect them, whereas some creatures, it wouldn't affect because they're not considered humanoids. What else it talks about? Their alignments, armor class, hit dice, speed, and there's different types of speed, not just the regular speed you have just like your character, but there's burrowing speed, climbing speed, flying speed, swimming speed. And of course, a lot of this is listed in each listing. Like if you look at Beholder, it'll tell you about the flying speed and all that of that particular creature. But they discuss it just a little bit more before you actually get into the actual creatures themselves. They quickly go over the ability stats, the skills, their vulnerabilities, resistances, immunities, their saving throws. It talks about the different kinds of senses they have, because a lot of them start out with some very interesting senses, like dark vision, blind sight, tremor sense, etc., so on and so forth. It'll tell you if they have any languages, and that's in each individual listing, but it talks about why some monsters might have different languages or how they might communicate, such as via telepathy. Of course, there's always XP value, and that's very important to all the players and the Dungeon Master as well. And of course, that's also likewise listed in each individual listing, but it discusses it just a little bit. There'll be other things too that the book talks about briefly before you even get into the monsters, which is the special traits, their actions, and if they're legendary creatures, how their lair actions work. And if a dragon is old enough, it becomes a legendary creature, and it has these things called lair actions, which it gets to do on certain initiative counts. And these are extra actions it gets to do. Now, there are certain rules about how it can use these lair actions, but it's pretty interesting and definitely something you should definitely read up on. And kind of neat, too, if you have a very unique NPC, a very unique monster. It's not too far of a stretch to say you might be able to give some of your guys lair actions, as long as they're reasonable. Now, it doesn't discuss that in the book, but as a DM, and I've been doing it for years, sometimes I like to stretch things a little bit and do things a little bit differently that conventionally you might not encounter in a more normal game of Dungeons and Dragons. But that's all the fun about role-playing games, is you can really modify things and change things to suit your particular needs for your particular game. And that is really just about it. There is a considerable amount of information in the 5th edition Monster Manual. And of course, you've got the table of contents, you've got the index, and not everything is going to be indexed during the table of contents. Well, I take that back. Everything's going to be in the table of contents, like Appendix A, miscellaneous creatures, which are those more mundane creatures I talked about. Appendix B, non-player characters. You'll have an index of stat blocks. There's all sorts of stuff in here. So, honestly, if you enjoy not just playing Dungeons & Dragons, but running Dungeons & Dragons, I know what I said about the Player's Handbook, that really with that one book, you wouldn't need anything else. And that's true. Or in my other video about the Player's Handbook and say either the Start Kit or especially the Essentials Kit, because there's so much cool stuff in there that you really don't need the Monster Manual. And that's true too. But if you're going to DM for any length of time, eventually you're going to have to break down and buy the 5th edition Monster Manual. Because there is so much information in here, so much stuff you're going to use, so much stuff you're going to need, it is indispensable. And really, the big three, Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, DMG, the Dungeon Master's Guide. And we'll be covering that next in our next video. But I just wanted to go over the Monster Manual for everybody real quick, especially if you're new to Dungeons & Dragons or you're just looking for something quick to listen to while you're on break at work or school or something like that. That's just my quick showcase of the 5th edition Monsters Manual. Well, I really hope you enjoyed me going over the Monster Manual for you. And that's pretty much all I got for today. My name's David Hunt, owner of GameMasters Guild, telling you to stay safe, play great games, and I'll see you real soon.